Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. Today we're going to talk about the project planning process. Before we get started, this is basically a 30,000-foot presentation. We won't get into fixing sinks and toilets and that kind of thing, so it's not that type of presentation. My name is Tommy Verdell, Jr. I serve as the Director of Facilities and Campus Services. We primarily handle all operational aspects of the campus. Anything rolling, firing, misfiring, providing electricity, power, that kind of thing. We handle all that type of operation from custodial services to our generation plant. So we see a lot of projects. We also serve as support for special projects on campus. We'll talk about the project planning process, and for most of you, I know a few of you in the room, this is more or less a refresher for things that you probably experience every day, and we'll try to just talk through these, keep it going. So we'll discuss the following topics: what is project planning, why you need a project plan, how long does it take, the planning process typically take, tools for project planning, elements of a plan, things that make up the components that deliver a functional plan, how to create a project plan, how to manage it, how to plan when you don't have all the answers. Aha, that's a good one. And then getting your plan approved, which is another necessary step that a lot of times isn't considered when we're given a task to do. And then we'll summarize it at the end. Shortly after we're done, we'll take questions and answers, I think, in order to stay on task. What a plan is not. For the most part, we get a to-do list, we get a list of items, we get directives, we get told, get this done by X date. That's not really a plan. We try to take into account all the components that make up the issue that has to be done. Although things like spreadsheets, Gantt charts, to-do lists are tools that can be used, they don't make up the plan, the entire plan itself. What it is a process. The whole process of establishing what the customer's needs are, getting a scope, establishing a process of carrying out the work, establishing a work process, what we call an order of work is what we called it, and clarifying the scope and what needs to be done. We develop tasks to accomplish that particular process or the particular plan that we're trying to achieve. And for the most part, project planning is building the bones, building the structure for whatever it is that gives you an operational framework to do whatever it is you need to do. That's pretty much it. It's a flowing, dynamic thing, depending upon what the task that you're being assigned to do is. Why do we need plans? That's obvious. For the most part, although it takes time and there's a personal investment in getting it started, the plan is developed to basically save time and to streamline your efficiency in terms of the efforts you put forth. It gives you a level of accountability so that as you're going through the process, it gives you the opportunity to troubleshoot and see things you typically don't see when you go from giving an assignment to getting it done. A good plan identifies three primary things: the tasks that are associated with what needs to be done, the responsibilities or roles that individual parties or stakeholders play, and then quality results. More so, did we actually achieve the goal that we sought to achieve? We put more time on the front end of establishing what that expectation was, and we put a framework in place to reach that expectation. It sets out the processes for everyone to follow so that everyone has clear direction on what needs to take place. It streamlines the doing. Like we said earlier, a lot of times we get a directive and we go do. Well, a lot of the times you inadvertently create work that you don't necessarily have to create when you react to a directive versus thinking through and planning it through. And then the project helps us monitor the progress. Now that's a big part, especially when you've got a project that's time sensitive, that for the most part affects a large group or a large body of people. Being able to monitor the progress and report where you are in getting it done is very important because it gives the higher ups an idea of where we are in the whole process of things. How long does a project planning take? Okay, that's a good question. It depends on how big the job is. It can be anywhere from organizing an office transition to establishing a program within a department. A good comparison, changing brake pads on a vehicle versus taking the entire motor out and replacing it. There are two different types of things. You go in with about 3 tools to change the brake pads, and you have to bring in a shop to change out a motor. So, you don't want to get those two switched up. The best method to determine this, a lot of the times what we try to do is we use precedent on previous projects to help us guide through the process that we use. Not reinventing the wheel. When there's something that works and it's been streamlined that may need to be tweaked, that'll get you off to a good planning start, have at it. It just saves time and efficiency. And then engaging other project managers. We do a lot of that in that we have a very diverse setup in campus services. We have an area that handles project planning. We have an area that handles our utilities and sustainability. So if we've got a project that incorporates 3 different shops, then it's appropriate to go ahead and coordinate with those 3 different project managers. Each one may have their own specific guidelines that impacts the next plan for the next manager. So it's important to do that. And then in that, one of the things I try to do whenever we're given tough tasks, I try to make sure that that time frame is upfront and present at all times. Tools for project planning. We talked a little bit about that with the spreadsheets and Gantt charts and different things. Some of the things that people employ are workshops, one-on-one meetings or interviews, and something that we try to do specifically in campus services is conduct surveys or customer focus groups. I really like the focus group aspect of it because you get to a more intimate setting, and your customers tend to give you more honest feedback when it's just localized. And we get a lot of good insight that way. The tools, using sticky notes, whatever it takes to get the brain working and getting that information out and on paper, identifying the important items, establishing priorities basically. What's the goal? What are we out to achieve? What are the expectations and how are we managing those expectations? Allow key headings to move around the plan. That's where when we spoke earlier about plan being dynamic. A lot of times when we go through the investment of writing a plan, putting it on the shelf, we think that thing is written in stone. You cannot flex from it, and that's a cardinal rule. Your plan is always dynamic because the circumstances are constantly changing and evolving when you're dealing with human capital. Elements of a project plan. The end result of the planning phase is the project plan itself. So as we talked earlier, it's the process that gets you to that point. You don't wake up one morning and all of a sudden I've got a plan for how we're getting the stadium ready for Auburn. Okay, that's not a checklist. It's not a to-do list. That's a whole ordeal. So in that, you've got all kinds of parties that are involved. You've got to consider all the components that go along with it. For large efforts, human resource management, that Auburn game. You talk about human capital. There's so much that has to be considered, and there's so much input you have to have from your colleagues that it's almost essential that you back up and make sure you establish that framework for what's important and the roles that everyone plays. The cost management, Auburn. We'll keep using Auburn because we got them next week, right? Luckily, they're in Auburn, not here. Cost management, the costs associated with executing the game, the costs associated with making sure the fans are being accommodated, the cost association making sure the networks are all plugged in, the power's provided, the backup generators are in place, the sound system, is it working? Do we have a backup? There's a litany of components that make up that framework that you have to take in consideration, not just for this type of project, but for any project. Think about all the things that all the roles that every individual plays and establish a human capital component for that. The communications plan, that is a huge part of this. Rarely do people that we contend with actually call it a communications plan, they just do it. Wrong answer. Depending upon how that process works, you need to have a plan on how you communicate what needs to take place. Communicating the expectations is a big mistake that a lot of us make. We don't necessarily make sure that the persons who are charging us with developing the plan, that we're managing their expectations to a deliverable. There's a big disconnect a lot of times. That's where that communication comes into play. Risk management. What happens when it goes wrong? What's our backup? Who's qualified to help us guide us through that process? It goes back up to the top where it says human resource management. Engage the people that know what to do. Make them a part of it. It may be a phone conversation. They may send you a spreadsheet that, hey, plug me in right there. It's as simple as that, but it all begins with communication. The plan includes enough information. A plan does not, in my opinion, need to be considered too much information. It's best to have more than you need than to go short in the ninth hour and have to explain to the administrators, well, we didn't plan for that. Okay, there you go. Who needs to be involved? We talked about getting buy-in from the stakeholders, no surprises. That all goes back up to that human resource management part. If all the parties agree and everyone is brought in and the communication is made and the expectation is made clear and everyone is communicated to and how that expectation needs to be met, I think you can get instant buy-in because they feel like they're a part of the whole thing, as opposed to a plan being given to them. How to create a project plan. That's simple. Just spend time with that team we talked about, that human capital. Clarify what's done together. Clarify the components that are done individually and how those are being communicated. Work out the processes to achieve the results. The end of the game, it's the deliverable that counts. Everyone has a role to play in that. Develop an action plan to take forward. In the event that we have another project like this, what precedents can we take from this project to help us better plan the next project? After every game, we have a debriefing. That's neat. You should hear some of the things that go on. And you'd be amazed at how simple things that you would take for granted are oftentimes completely overlooked in those debriefing sections. You mean to tell me we missed that? Yeah, you did. You missed it. The project manager is responsible to produce the plan with the team's input. It's not a dictatorship. You have to get buy-in. How to manage your plan. The plan is not written in stone. We talked about that earlier. Make changes when changes are needed. It's a situational leadership type of endeavor. Depending upon what's going on, we've got the Auburn game, we've got inclement weather, we've got 2 tornadoes coming from different directions. Your game plan just changed, all right? So you got to make adjustments for that. If the plan isn't working, step back and review. Gather the team necessary and re-coordinate, relaunch, regroup, take another approach. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The earlier you do that, the more successful you'll be in the end. How to plan when you, I like this one. How to plan when you don't have all the answers. I get that all the time. We never have the answers. We just got to get it done. Yeah, we do, but it's rarely do you have the answers unless you're me. I put that there to see if y'all were paying attention. How many of y'all caught it? Okay, the rest of y'all was asleep. Okay, project assumptions. Make sure that the resources are available, number one. Make sure that required funding is available. Okay, they gave us a directive to get this done. They didn't give you an account number. They want it done by tomorrow. Required funding is available? Yes, move forward. Required funding is not available? We need to back up, regroup, and communicate to the higher ups, hey, that's a no-go. Decision made are in line with standards and other approvals required. That's where the communication comes in. Yeah, Tommy, we told you to get that done by tomorrow, but we meant that building, not that one over there. So there's a lot of communication that goes into that. If assumptions aren't correct, revise, plan, and develop a new timeline if that's necessary. I've learned through my experience in dealing with different projects on campus, the more information, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent, that you give your administrators as early in the process, it gives them the ability to plan themselves and how do I communicate to Dr. K that we won't be able to deliver this. There's a lot involved with that. So that's a very important thing there. Getting your plan approved. Okay, deadline's tomorrow. Got all the money, got the account number, and I was told to get it done. Okay, did you go through the right approvals to get it done? Did you go see Don Buffin to make sure that's legal? Okay, let's go see Don Buffin to make sure that's legal. Make sure you get all your approvals in place and make sure that the route to get all these approvals are established and you know who needs to be contacted in order to get the approvals. That's something I had to learn when first coming to Mississippi State. It's a beautiful place. I realized that things work really well, right, coming from Southern, but there is a distinct process that you go through to get approvals. Learn that process and make sure you include all your stakeholders. You'll see that's constant through this whole presentation. In summary, I'd say the most important things to remember is Don't rush the planning part of it. Take the initial time, make the investment to understand what your objectives are, learn what those expectations are so that there's and establish early in the plan whether or not these are manageable expectations. We've got a realistic goal. I've got funding to pull it off. I agree, I can pull this off. If not, I may need to consult, find some assistance, meet with other colleagues, regroup, revise, submit a new plan. Take time to properly do this whole thing properly. Again, I'll use Auburn. Games next week. We got to have it ready. Today's Wednesday. Have you done X, Y, Z, and Q? No, I hadn't. Okay, well, make sure you get those done in due time. Communicate where you are in the process, and make sure that the stakeholders are all in line with that. If you don't understand what the issue is, make sure you get an understanding with the team players, people, and don't be afraid to ask questions. That's something I learned whenever you've got a power outage and someone wants to know why power isn't on the east side of campus. They don't want a thought process. They want a straight answer. So you've got to have a plan on how you route that information to them in the correct way. Great planning sets up great success. Proper processes, tools, and systems in place can give you a perfect result. In an ideal world, that's what we seek to try to achieve. Is it perfect? Rarely ever. But the attempt, the effort, and the teamwork can be perfected over a period of time. It just takes doing. And that's it. That's pretty much all I have, I think. So you guys can wake up now. Do we have any questions? You mean to tell me, is that awesome that you don't have questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
What's that number one thing just over and over again that you wish you could get through people's heads when it comes to putting the project together?
Communication, establishing stakeholders, and consulting with project managers in areas that you're not quite sure about. Don't be too afraid to communicate to colleagues that do certain things for a living. Communicate with them. One of the things that planners must also always keep in mind, take your ego and put it in your back pocket if you want to be successful. Questions?
As far as your communication strategy when you're planning a project, do you like to have meetings face-to-face? Do you rely on email? Because things that are said, if you don't have the whole group together, could get misinterpreted.
Absolutely. What we try to do is once we amass the stakeholders of a particular group that make up the planning committee, I'll send out an email just to meet and greet. Hey, I'm this guy. We're calling to check with you. And then the second thing I typically do is try to call a coordination meeting. That's when you get all the parties together and you map out the strategy for what you're trying to do. Before all that takes place, I go through that process in which we make sure we've got the approvals, the funding's in place, the objectives are clear and can be presented back, and that the expectation is clearly established and manageable. That way, when you have your coordination meetings, you're able to give your team a concise breakdown of what needs to happen. And I try not to cover all of that in the first meeting, because the reason you have stakeholders is so that when you give them the expectation, give them a little time to digest what you gave them, because they may come back and, hey, he can't do that. Bring it back, communicate to the team, hey, we've got another planning session set for next Wednesday. We'd like to regroup and get to the next part of our plan. One of the things that I found is very important, establish clear, short, manageable goals as quickly as possible. That gets instant buy-in. And take the feedback and use it. Actually show them how it's being utilized. I've been successful in a lot of things that we've done that way. Not everything. Once the lights go out, nobody cares about a plan. One of your own, Verdell. Where are the lights? We gotta make it happen. So appreciate it. Any other questions?
Do you use any software for timelines and project planning?
Yeah, personally, I like Microsoft Projects, and I use the Gantt chart version of that because it gives you a cartoon of how all the parties line up. And with the Gantt chart, say Microsoft Projects, there's a version of that Gantt chart in which you can actually connect milestones with tasks and establish your resource groups that captures a lot of what we said here today. And it reads easy. To me, I've used it for years. And it gives you a snapshot of where your bottlenecks occur in communication. So that's one tool that we use a lot. Now, on the construction side, there are different types of softwares. I don't know if you're interested in that. But there's one in particular called Primavera that does that exponentially. And, you know, all the way from pouring the foundations in place to establishing what the roofing membrane needs to be. So I take that same process, which basically is building a skeleton for a building, and I built a skeleton for that project, right? As opposed to bricks and mortar, I've got a human resource manager, I've got a training director, you've got human capital as opposed to built structures. It's basically the process that I use. Questions? Okay, when we're done, if they ask for a survey, tell them this was the best one.
We sure appreciate it.
Thank you.